The white lilies were my idea. I cut them myself that morning, 6 stems from the bunch I'd bought at the Kroger on Cascade Road, and arranged them in the crystal vase Gerald gave me for our 15th anniversary. I set them in the center of the living room table, stepped back, and decided they were exactly right. Not because I was celebrating, not yet, but because I wanted the room to look beautiful on the day everything changed. I wanted to remember it that way. It was Wednesday, January 14th, the kind of Atlanta winter morning that can't make up its mind cold enough for a coat bright enough to fool you into thinking it's warm. Sunlight came through the white curtains and fell in pale gold strips across the rug I bought in 2001, the year Vanessa Holloway Financial Services turned its first real profit. I noticed these things the way you notice things when you've been paying attention your whole life, and you know that a moment is about to matter. My son arrived at 10 o'clock exactly. Darnell Holloway, 41 years old, in a navy suit and a striped tie, carrying himself the way men carry themselves when they believe they are walking into a room to receive something. His wife, Renee, was 1 step behind him, back straight, wearing the kind of smile that lives only on the surface of the face and never travels to the eyes. She looked around my living room the way she always did, cataloging, measuring, calculating the distance between what she saw and what she believed she deserved. They sat on the sofa across from me. My daughter Keisha arrived 5 minutes later. She sat down on my side of the room without being asked, without hesitating, without looking at her brother. I had told her where to sit. She had agreed. Attorney Gloria Simmons sat at the head of the table, a blue folder in front of her closed. She is 58 years old, with silver hair she keeps short in a manner that reminds me of the best teachers I ever had, the ones who believed in being precise because precision is a form of respect. Darnell adjusted his jacket and leaned forward slightly, the posture of a man preparing to receive good news. "Good morning, everyone," Gloria said. "Before we discuss anything else, I need to walk you through some legal changes that have been made to Mrs. Holloway's estate over the past 10 weeks. I watched my son's face in the half-second before he understood what that sentence meant. That half-second is what I want to tell you about. Not just what happened in that room, and not just what I did to prepare for it, but why. Why a 67-year-old woman who had spent her entire life giving, building, loving, and forgiving sat quietly at the head of her own table one January morning and decided that this was where it ended. 6 weeks before that morning, Darnell had come to my house with a stack of legal documents and asked me to sign over full financial power of attorney. He spoke in the voice he used when he wanted something warm, reasonable, wrapped in concern. I smiled. I poured him tea. I told him I'd think about it. The moment his car left my driveway, I called Gloria Simmons. Not because I was afraid, not because I was caught off guard, but because I had seen this coming for 2 years, and I had spent those 2 years making sure that when it arrived, I would be ready. They thought I was just a tired old woman waiting to hand everything over. They had no idea that everything they came for was already gone, and that I was the one who moved it. Let me be clear about one thing from the start. I did not inherit a single dollar. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1957, the third of 4 children. My father, Robert Holloway, worked at a steel mill in Ensley for 31 years. My mother, Dorothy, cleaned rooms at St. Vincent's Hospital. We lived in a house with 3 small bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen where the table was also the homework desk, the sewing table, and the place where my mother sat on Sunday evenings to plan the week's meals with whatever was in the refrigerator. We were not poor in the way that breaks people. We were poor in the way that teaches them. Nobody in our house complained about what we didn't have. Not because we weren't allowed to, because there was simply no time for it. My father left before 5 every morning. My mother came home after 6 every evening. Everything in between was motion purpose, the quiet understanding that your life is built by the accumulation of days, and each day either moves you forward or it doesn't. I learned to keep books from watching my mother. She didn't call it that. She called it knowing where the money is a small green notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer, updated every Friday night after dinner. every dollar accounted for. I was 9 years old the first time she let me add up the column for her. I got it right on the first try. She nodded once and handed me the pencil. That was the beginning. I won a full academic scholarship to Alabama A&M University in 1975. Not a partial scholarship, not need-based aid, a full academic scholarship on the strength of my grades and my test scores. I was the first person in my family to attend a 4-year university. I studied accounting because I already knew how to think that way, and because I understood even at 17 that the people who know where the money is will always have more power than the people who don't. I graduated in 1979, moved to Atlanta, and took a job as a staff accountant at a small construction firm in Decatur called Morrison & Webb. I was 22 years old. I had $847 in my savings account and a used Datsun with a cracked dashboard. I thought I was rich. The thing that changed everything happened in 1987 when I was 8 months pregnant with my son. Morrison & Webb filed for bankruptcy in April of that year. I found out on a Tuesday morning when I arrived at the office and discovered the doors locked and a notice from a law firm taped to the glass. I stood on the sidewalk in the Atlanta heat with my hands on my stomach and looked at that notice for a long time. Then I went home, sat down at my kitchen table, and made a list. 3 business owners in my neighborhood needed help with their books and couldn't afford a real accounting firm. Margaret Tate, who ran a hair salon on Peachtree. Calvin Brooks, who owned a laundromat over in Vine City. James and Gloria Odom, who operated a fish fry restaurant on Auburn Avenue that had been in their family since 1962. Good people, hardworking people. People who were being slowly buried by paperwork they didn't understand and didn't have time to learn. I called all 3 of them that week. I charged them rates a large firm would have laughed at. I worked from that kitchen table with an adding machine, a stack of ledger books, and a secondhand computer I bought on layaway. Vanessa Holloway Financial Services was born on that kitchen table in May of 1987. My son Darnell was born 6 weeks later in June. I ran that company for 34 years. By the time I sold it in 2019, we had 4 full-time employees, a Midtown Atlanta office on the 14th floor, and over 200 small business clients, most of them Black-owned, most of them in communities where professional financial services had never been accessible. I sold the company for $1.4 million. Every dollar of that money had my fingerprints on it. Every single one. After the sale, I made deliberate choices about where the money went. $900,000 went into a long-term investment portfolio, a mix of index funds, municipal bonds, and dividend stocks that Howard Pruitt, my accountant of 20 years, helped me structure for stability rather than speculation. $300,000 went into a high-yield savings account as a liquid reserve. The rest covered taxes on the sale and a few personal expenses during the transition into retirement. By January of 2024, after 4 years of careful management, that portfolio stood at $430,000. The savings reserve was at $310,000. And the house at 4712 Cascade Drive, which I had bought in 1994 for $185,000 and lived in for 30 years, was valued at $680,000. That is what I built. That is what this story is about protecting. My husband Gerald Holloway taught history at Frederick Douglass High School for 27 years. He was not a wealthy man by any conventional measure, and he never wanted to be. He wanted to teach to read to coach the junior varsity basketball team on weekday afternoons and to come home to me and our children for dinner. He made chicken on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He read to the kids until they were too old to admit they still wanted him to. He was the quietest, most genuinely decent person I have ever known. He understood without it ever needing to be said that the money in our household was mine, not because it was withheld from him, but because he had no interest in it. He trusted me with it completely, and without ego, which is rarer than people think. When we disagreed about financial decisions, he said his piece, and then deferred to me not from passivity, but from a clear-eyed recognition that I was simply better at it than he was. Gerald died of pancreatic cancer in October of 2014. We had 25 years together. There are things I still reach for in the mornings, a particular quality of silence, the sound of coffee being made in the kitchen, before I'm fully awake and find missing. I expect I always will. I threw myself back into the company after he died. Not to escape grief exactly, but because work had always been the language in which I expressed what I couldn't say otherwise. I sold 5 years later when I was ready, not when the market was ready, not when my children thought I should. When I was ready. Darnell came into this world in June of 1987, 6 weeks after I opened the company that would define the next 3 decades of my life. I have tried over the years to understand what that timing did to him, whether growing up watching his mother build something from nothing made him believe that things could be built from nothing, or whether it made him believe that things simply appeared the way the company appeared to him already. They're already successful, already producing the life he was accustomed to by the time he was old enough to notice it. He has an MBA from Georgia State. He has never held a job for more than 3 years. He describes himself as a freelance business consultant, which in practice means that he generates occasional income from occasional projects and lives the rest of the time on what he and his wife Renee bring in between them. Renee Holloway works as a human resources manager for a Marriott property group. She earns approximately $72,000 a year, which is a perfectly respectable salary, and not remotely sufficient to fund the life she has decided to live. 2 BMW leases, a private school tuition of $18,000 per child per year for 2 children, international vacations every summer, a house in a neighborhood slightly beyond what their combined income can comfortably support. I watched this for years. I said nothing. It was not my money, and it was not my business, and I have never believed in telling adults how to spend what they earn. The problem came when they ran out of what they earned. Keisha is 36 years old and works as a registered nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital. She lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta, drives a 7-year-old Honda, and has no debt beyond a modest student loan she is quietly and steadily paying off. She and I have always been closer than Darnell and I, not because I loved her more, but because she and I speak the same language. We both understand that a life is built one careful day at a time. In recent years, though, Darnell had been pulling her in, not by force. Keisha is not a woman who responds to force, but by the slow, patient pressure of a person who knows how to use someone's love for family against them. Darnell knew that Keisha wanted peace above almost everything else. He used that want the way a tool is used deliberately and without shame. I knew this. It was the part that hurt most. In the summer of 2020, shortly after I finalized the sale of the company, I hired Gloria Simmons to draft my estate plan. It was straightforward. Split the assets equally between Darnell and Keisha, place the house in a trust for 5 years before any sale, divide the proceeds evenly when the time came. I thought it was fair. I thought it was sufficient. I made one mistake, not in the documents and what I said out loud. I told Darnell the general structure, not the specific dollar amounts, not the details of the investment accounts, but enough for him to understand the architecture, the trust, the timeline, the probate process, the fact that a will can be contested. I told him because I thought transparency was a form of love. I thought that being open about my plans was the same as saying I trust you. I see you as a partner in the future of this family. What I did not account for was that for some people a blueprint is not a gesture of trust. It is a map to the thing they want. The 2020 will had a flaw I didn't catch at the time. The language around the trust and the management of the house was vague. No named trustee, no clear decision-making process, no defined criteria for when the property could be sold. It was the kind of language that a good attorney could use to argue before a sympathetic judge that the person who wrote it hadn't been thinking clearly. Darnell read that will more carefully than I knew. 2 years before January 14th, I started noticing. The phone calls changed first. Darnell had never been a particularly attentive caller once a week, if I was lucky, and usually when he needed something. Suddenly he was calling 3 or 4 times a week. The questions were different too. Less "how are you doing, Mom?" and more "how have you been feeling? Did you go to the doctor this month? Are you still taking that medication?" he asked with the right inflection. He sounded like a concerned son, but he asked too much detail. He remembered things from the previous call, built on them, followed up. The way you do when you're gathering information rather than checking in on someone you love. Renee began appearings on weekends, bringing food offering to help with the house, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee and conversation that managed to be both warm and somehow data gathering. In 15 years of marriage to my son, Renee had never once offered to help me clean out a closet. Now she was here every Saturday, eyes moving around the rooms with a kind of restless attentiveness I recognized from my years of watching clients who were hiding something. The moment that settled it for me came on a Thursday evening in the fall of 2022. Darnell stayed late after dinner, which he almost never did, and I heard from the hallway the unmistakable sound of a phone camera shutter, clicking in the living room, then near the bookshelves, then by the front windows. I walked in. He was standing with his phone raised, pointing at the oil painting above the fireplace, the one Gerald and I bought at an art fair in Savannah in 2003. "Just saving some memories, Mom," he said and smiled. I smiled back. I didn't say anything. That night I went to the pharmacy and bought a small blue notebook. I came home, sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water, and wrote the date at the top of the first page. Beneath it, I wrote Thursday, October 6th, 2022. Darnell photographed artwork and furniture in living room. Said saving memories. Renee present. Duration approximately 40 minutes. I kept that notebook for 14 months. By the time it became relevant, it was 47 pages long. September 4th, 2023. That is the date I want you to remember. I had been admitted to Piedmont Atlanta Hospital 3 days earlier with a respiratory infection. Nothing life-threatening. The kind of thing that gets more complicated when you're 67 than it would have been at 40. I was expected to be there 4 or 5 days. I was uncomfortable but not frightened, and I spent most of the time reading and sleeping and watching the nurses move through the halls with the particular efficiency of people who understand what their work actually means. Darnell came every day. He sat in the chair beside the bed and talked about the kids, about the weather, about a restaurant he'd tried in Buckhead. He brought flowers, on the second day yellow tulips, my least favorite, but I thanked him for them. On the third morning, he came in carrying a manila folder. "Mom, I've been talking to a few people," he said, settling into the chair and laying the folder on the edge of my bed. "And I think we should get some paperwork in order while you're resting. Just precautionary stuff. For your protection." He opened the folder. 11 pages, paper-clipped in 2 sections. He walked me through the first section, a standard healthcare directive, the kind that specifies your wishes for medical treatment in the event you can't communicate them. Straightforward. Sensible. The kind of document any responsible adult should have. Then he set the second section on top of the first, and kept talking, his voice easy and unhurried, the way it gets when he's made a decision and is presenting it as something still open for discussion. I picked up the second section and read it. I read every line. I am an accountant. I have read legal documents for 34 years. I know exactly what words like unlimited and without restriction, and including but not limited to the sale of real property, mean when they appear in a financial document. What Darnell had placed in my hands was a durable general power of attorney, unlimited in scope, unlimited in duration, with no automatic termination clause, and no requirement for accounting. With my signature on that document, he could sell my house without my knowledge or consent. He could access every bank account and investment portfolio in my name. He could open new lines of credit in my name. He could change the beneficiaries on my life insurance policies. He could enter into financial contracts on my behalf. He could, in the most precise legal sense, become me financially for as long as I lived. I set the document down on my lap. I looked at my son. His face was open, expectant, patient. The face of someone who has rehearsed this moment and believes it is going well. "Leave it with me," I said. "I'm tired. I'll look it over." He nodded. He patted my hand. He left. The moment the door closed, I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling for a long time. At 11 o'clock that night, I called Loretta Banks. Loretta and I have been friends for 40 years. We met at Alabama, A&M. Our freshman year, lived on the same hall, went to each other's weddings, sat beside each other at our mother's funerals. She is the person I call when I need to say something out loud to make sure it is real. She picked up on the third-ring voice, still carrying the edges of sleep. I read her the key language from the document. From memory, I had already committed it. Loretta was quiet for a moment. "Vanessa," she said, "don't sign that. And don't let him know you read it carefully. I know I said. I just needed someone else to know this exists." "I know," she said. "I'm here." We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes without saying much. Sometimes that's what you need. Not advice, not strategy, just the sound of someone breathing on the other end of the line, reminding you that you are not alone in the dark. I was discharged from the hospital on September 7th. I went home, made a pot of coffee, and called Howard Pruitt. Howard is 63 years old and has been my accountant since 2003. He processed the sale of my company. He filed 20 years of tax returns. He knows my financial life the way a doctor knows a patient, not just the current numbers, but the history, the patterns, the places where things have been sutured together after breaking. I trust him with the kind of trust that is built slowly and tested repeatedly and never given lightly. I told him what I needed: a complete security audit of every account, every access point, every transaction going back 24 months. He called me back in 4 days, 3 transfers, each one $4,800, deliberately kept below the $5,000 threshold that triggers automatic bank reporting. Executed in March, June, and August of 2023. The receiving account belonged to an entity called Holloway Family Management, LLC, registered in the state of Georgia in January of 2023. Total transferred, $14,400. I was not a named party in that LLC. I had never heard of it. I had never authorized any transfers to it. Howard dug further. 2 unauthorized login attempts on my investment portal, once in July, once in September, from a device that was not mine. A request to change the email address linked to my primary bank account submitted on August 15th and rejected because it failed 2-factor authentication. A call to my bank's customer service line on August 22nd, inquiring about the process for adding a joint account holder. The call came from a number registered to Darnell J. Holloway. I sat at my kitchen table with Howard's printout spread in front of me, each page marked with yellow highlighter, and I thought about the word methodical. My son had been methodical. I had to give him that. Then Howard turned to the last page. The LLC registration listed 2 officers: Darnell J. Holloway, Managing Director, Keisha M. Holloway, Co-Director. Her signature was at the bottom of the registration document dated January 11th, 2023. I looked at that signature for a long time. Keisha's handwriting is smaller than Darnell's, more careful. The letters slightly compressed the way they get when she's not entirely comfortable with what she's writing, but is doing it anyway. I have seen that handwriting on birthday cards and grocery lists and get well notes left on my kitchen counter when I had a bad cold 3 winters ago. I did not call her. I opened the blue notebook, recorded what I had found, and continued. On October 3rd, I went to see Dr. Elaine Foster's for my annual physical. Elaine has been my doctor for 15 years. She is one of those physicians who understands that a patient's life outside the office is as relevant as the numbers on a chart, and she treats you accordingly. She closed the exam room door before she spoke. That told me something before she said a word. "Vanessa, I need to tell you something, and I want you to hear it without worrying because I handled it correctly. Last week, someone called this office identifying himself as your son. He asked about your general health status, your cognitive function, and whether you were taking any medications that might affect your judgment or decision-making. She paused. I provided no information. I reminded the caller that patient records are confidential. But I thought you needed to know the call was made. I sat on the edge of the exam table in my paper gown and looked at the poster on the wall, the one showing the chambers of the human heart in cross-section, and understood with complete clarity what I was dealing with. Darnell was not just trying to take my money. He was building a legal argument that I was no longer capable of protecting it. The unauthorized access to my accounts, the power of attorney document, the call to my doctor. These were not separate incidents. They were a sequence, a strategy, and it had been running for months while I sat across from him at Sunday dinners and passed him the biscuits and asked about the grandchildren. That evening I called Gloria Simmons. The call lasted 47 minutes. I have been watching this for 2 years, I told her. I have a notebook. I have records. I have bank statements. I have everything. Good, she said, because here is what we're going to do. Gloria Simmons's office is on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Road in Buckhead. The waiting room has good light and no unnecessary furniture, which I have always taken as a sign that the person running the office understands the difference between appearance and substance. The certificates on the wall are from the Georgia Bar Association and the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. The photographs beside them are of women mostly older, mostly smiling, who I understood without being told were clients who had come through something difficult and arrived on the other side of it intact. I came in on a Monday morning in early October with 3 labeled folders. Howard's marked printouts in a sealed plastic bag, the original power of attorney document Darnell had left at the hospital, and the blue notebook. Gloria read everything before she said a word. That is one of the things I respect most about her. She does not perform attentiveness. She simply pays attention. When she finished, she took a red pen and turned to page 12 of the 2020 will. She drew a slow circle around a single paragraph, the section governing the management and eventual sale of the house at 4712 Cascade Drive. This language, she said, setting the pen down, is the problem. There is no named trustee. There is no defined decision-making process. There are no criteria for when the property can be sold or how disputes between beneficiaries are to be resolved. In plain terms, Vanessa, this is a door, and a competent attorney on the other side could walk right through it. Walk through it how? By arguing that the person who wrote this will was not thinking clearly when she wrote it, by requesting a cognitive evaluation, by presenting evidence or the appearance of evidence that you were experiencing diminished capacity at the time of signing. Combined with what your son has already been building, she tapped Howard's printouts, he would have a viable case. Not a certain one, but viable. I looked at the circled paragraph. I had drafted that language myself working with her predecessor at the firm. I had thought it was clear. So we closed the door, I said. We do more than close it, Gloria said. We replace it with a wall. We worked for 3 hours that day. What came out of those 3 hours was a new will, precise, specific, and structured in a way that left no interpretable language, no ambiguous timelines, and no decisions left to chance. The house at 4712 Cascade Drive would be transferred immediately, not upon my death, but immediately into the Holloway Legacy Trust. Gloria Simmons would serve as independent trustee. Not Darnell, not Keisha, not any member of my family. An officer of the court accountable to the court with a legal obligation to act in the interest of the trust rather than in the interest of any individual beneficiary. The $430,000 investment portfolio would be distributed as follows upon my passing. 40% to Keisha Holloway, directly transferred outside of probate as a designated beneficiary. 40% to the Holloway Scholarship Fund at Alabama A&M University, to be established and governed by a board I would appoint before the end of the year. And 20% to Darnell Holloway, but only under a specific condition. The release of his portion would be held for 3 years and dispersed only if no finding of financial misconduct against him had been confirmed by any court or regulatory body within that period. The $310,000 savings reserve would transfer directly to Keisha and the scholarship fund as designated beneficiaries, bypassing probate entirely. Gloria looked up from her notes. You want to put a conduct condition on your son's inheritance. I want to put a conduct condition on his behavior, I said. Those are two different things. She considered this for a moment. Then she nodded once and wrote it down. Before I left that afternoon, I asked her one more question. If Darnell were to obtain a power of attorney from me or through a court order, would that affect any of this? Not the trust, she said. Once the house is in the trust, it is no longer your personal property. A power of attorney over you does not extend to trust assets. That is the point. I picked up my folders and my notebook and my sealed plastic bag of evidence. Then let's transfer the house, I said. I went back to Howard's office the following week with a specific request. I need everything documented to evidentiary standard, I told him. Not just for my records, for potential legal proceedings. Howard is not a dramatic man. He has been sitting across from clients in difficult situations for 30 years, and he has developed the particular stillness of someone who has learned that the most useful thing you can offer a person in crisis is clarity rather than sympathy. He looked at me over his reading glasses and nodded without asking unnecessary questions. What he produced over the next 10 days was a 53-page financial forensics report. Every transaction, every access attempt, every inquiry, every discrepancy organized chronologically and annotated with the precision of a man who genuinely loves what he does. Each page was signed and certified in his capacity as a licensed CPA. Each page cross-referenced the relevant bank or investment institution's own records. Beyond what we had already found, the deeper audit revealed 2 unauthorized login attempts to my investment management portal. The first on July 17th, the second on September 3rd, one day before Darnell arrived at the hospital with the power of attorney documents. Both attempts originated from an IP address registered to a home network in the zip code where Darnell and Renee lived. A request submitted on August 15th to change the primary email address on my main bank account rejected automatically because it failed the 2-factor authentication requirement tied to my personal cell phone. The requesting device matched the same IP address. A recorded customer service call on August 22nd, in which a man identifying himself as the son of account holder Vanessa Holloway inquired about the process and timeline for adding a co-owner to an existing account. The call lasted 11 minutes. The representative explained the requirements. The caller thanked him and disconnected. I read through the report twice at Howard's conference table while he sat across from me and waited. Howard, I said when I finished, I need 5 copies. The original goes to Gloria. 1 copy stays in your files. 1 goes to Loretta Banks. 1 goes in my home safe. And 1 goes in the fireproof box in my bedroom closet. He looked at me for a moment. Vanessa, are you going to court or are you preparing for war? I'm preparing for both, I said. I'm letting them decide which one arrives first. In the 30 days that followed my first meeting with Gloria, I made 3 financial moves. All of them were completely legal. None of them were visible to anyone who was not specifically looking, and no one was specifically looking because no one knew to look. The first move was the simplest. I opened a new savings account at Truist Bank, an institution I had never used, not connected to any email address. Darnell knew not accessible through any device that had ever been in his possession. I transferred $200,000 from my primary savings reserve into that account. The access credentials existed only in my memory. I wrote nothing down. I told no one except Gloria in a sealed letter she kept in her office safe. The second move was the most important. On November 2nd, 2023, the house at 4712 Cascade Drive was officially transferred into the Holloway Legacy Trust. Gloria filed the paperwork. Judge Calvin Reeves reviewed and approved the trust instrument. The deed was re-recorded with Fulton County. From that day forward, the house was no longer my personal property. It was trust property. It could not be sold, mortgaged, or encumbered by any action taken against me personally. Any power of attorney granted over me voluntarily or by court order would have no jurisdiction over assets held by the trust. The third move was administrative but essential. I contacted every financial institution holding assets in my name and updated the beneficiary designations on every account investment portfolios, the remaining savings accounts my life insurance policy. In each case, I removed estate as the beneficiary and replaced it with direct designations, Keisha's name and the Holloway Scholarship Fund as named individuals and entities. This meant that upon my death, those assets would transfer directly to the designated beneficiaries without passing through probate, without going before a judge, without being subject to a will contest, without requiring anyone's approval. Darnell could challenge a will. He could not challenge a beneficiary designation on a financial account. Those transfers happened by contract, not by inheritance law. I did all of this between October and November of 2023. Every Sunday during those same weeks, I made dinner for my family. I fried chicken the way my mother taught me, soaked overnight in buttermilk, seasoned in the morning, fried in cast iron at the right temperature, which is something you learn by feel after enough years and cannot fully explain to someone who hasn't done it. I made cornbread. I made sweet tea. I asked Darnell about the boys. His sons are 9 and 12, good kids, not responsible for any of this. I let Renee tell me about the trip to Paris they were planning for spring. I refilled Darnell's glass when he held it out without looking up from his phone. I smiled at the right moments. I laughed at the right moments. I gave them absolutely nothing. Acting is easier than people think when you don't need them to believe you're happy. You only need them to believe you don't know anything. And the best way to make someone believe you don't know anything is to behave exactly as you always have, because people see what they expect to see, and they expected to see a mother who loved them too much to fight back. Gloria gave me a legal education in the fall of 2023 that no law school teaches, and that every adult with significant assets should receive. She explained the difference between documentation that is emotionally compelling and documentation that is legally usable. The distinction matters more than most people realize. A tearful account of betrayal moves a jury. A properly time-stamped, cross-referenced, professionally certified paper trail wins a case. The goal was the second one. Every text message exchange with Darnell was screenshotted on the day it was received with the date and time visible in the image, backed up to an encrypted cloud account that only I had access to. Every email was forwarded to a separate address created specifically for this purpose, with forwarding receipts preserved. The original power of attorney document from the hospital was placed in a sealed envelope signed across the seal by Gloria and by me, stored in her office safe rather than in my home, because my home, unlike her office, was accessible to people who might want to make things disappear. Georgia is a one-party consent state for audio recording. That means that if I am a participant in a conversation, I am legally permitted to record it without informing the other party. Beginning in October, I recorded every in-person conversation I had with Darnell, using a small voice recorder I carried in the pocket of whatever I was wearing. The recordings were uploaded to the encrypted cloud account the same night, and the blue notebook continued. 47 pages by the time it was relevant. Every entry written by hand, date, time, location, individuals, present verbatim summary of what was said, and any physical details I considered significant. Gloria told me that handwritten contemporaneous records, when combined with corroborating digital evidence, are among the most difficult things to challenge in court. I had been keeping records by hand for 40 years. I knew how to do it. "You have built a very thorough case," Gloria told me at our meeting in late November. "I've been building cases my entire career," I said. "The medium is different. The discipline is the same." This was Gloria's suggestion, and I want to give her full credit for it, because when she first said it, I thought it was unnecessary. I was wrong. Vanessa, she said at our November meeting, one of the most effective weapons in a contested estate case is a cognitive capacity argument. The opposing party claims the testator that you lacked sufficient mental clarity when making financial decisions. It is difficult to disprove retroactively, so we are going to disprove it proactively. She wanted me to undergo a full cognitive and neurological assessment, administered by a licensed physician, documented to medical and legal standards, notarized and placed on file. I called Dr. Elaine Foster's the next morning. The assessment took 90 minutes. It covered short and long-term memory, logical reasoning, financial literacy risk assessment, verbal fluency, and executive function. Dr. Foster's administered it herself with a licensed neuropsychologist present as an observer. The written report, signed by both physicians and notarized by a Georgia licensed notary, contained the following conclusion. Patient demonstrates cognitive performance in the top percentile for her demographic and age group. Financial reasoning and analytical capacity are exceptional. Verbal memory and executive function show no indicators of decline. No evidence of diminished capacity in any domain assessed. Patient is fully competent to make independent financial and legal decisions. I read it once, set it down. Elaine, I said, thank you. She looked at me with the expression of someone who understands more than they are going to say out loud. Take care of yourself, Vanessa. I gave the original to Gloria. A copy went into my home safe. A copy went to Loretta Banks with specific instructions. If anything happens to me before this is resolved, give this to Gloria immediately. If Darnell intended to stand in front of a judge and call his mother confused, he was going to have to do it with this document on the table across from him. December arrived the way Atlanta. Decembers do mild and slightly indecisive, warm enough in the afternoons to sit outside, but cold enough by evening to remind you that winter had technically arrived. The pecan tree in my backyard had gone bare. The Christmas wreath on the front door was the same one I'd used for 8 years, and I saw no reason to change it. Darnell called about the power of attorney for the 3rd time in early December. This time, instead of calling, he came in person. And he didn't come alone. He brought Renee. And he brought a man I had never met whom he introduced as Bradley Watts, a family financial advisor he said he'd been working with. Bradley Watts was in his mid-40s, well-dressed in the way of someone who understands that clothing is a form of argument. He carried a leather portfolio and set it on his knees when he sat down, which he did without being invited to. He had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are paying very close attention while appearing to pay none at all. His eyes moved through my living room slowly and thoroughly, the furniture, the artwork, the bookshelves, the built-in cabinet in the corner where I keep Gerald's books. I know that kind of looking. I have seen it in clients over 34 years. It is the looking of someone who is assigning value. I poured tea for all 3 of them. I asked Bradley Watts pleasantly, and with genuine curiosity, which university his financial planning credentials came from, which regulatory body had licensed him, and which professional associations he belonged to. He answered in the way of someone who had not expected to be questioned and was improvising his answers slightly faster than was comfortable. I nodded at each answer as though it were satisfying. When they raised the power of attorney again, I told them I was still consulting with my doctor about some test results before making any significant decisions. I said it with the particular vagueness of an older woman who is not quite tracking all the details of her own medical situation. I had practiced the tone. After they left, I stood at the front window and watched Bradley Watts's car pull out behind Darnell's. Then I called Gloria. They brought someone to the house to assess the property, I said. A pause on her end. How long before your meeting with them? 5 weeks. Then we need to move now. Is everything in place? I looked around my living room. The lilies I hadn't bought yet, the rug from 2001, the painting from Savannah Gerald's books visible through the glass cabinet door. Everything is in place, I said. On a Tuesday evening in the 2nd week of December, my doorbell rang at 7 o'clock. I looked at the security camera monitor in the kitchen. Keisha, alone. No Darnell, no prior notice. I opened the door. She was wearing her scrubs from work. She had come directly from the hospital, and she was carrying nothing except her keys and the particular expression of someone who has been rehearsing what they're about to say since before they got in the car. "Can I come in, Mom?" "Of course you can." She followed me to the kitchen. She did not sit in the living room where guests sit. She went to the kitchen table, the old round one I've had since 1993, the one with the slight wobble on one side that I have never gotten fixed, because Gerald always said it gave the table character. She sat in the chair she always sat in as a child, the one facing the window. The same chair where she used to do her homework while I made dinner. I sat across from her. She looked at her hands for a while. Then she looked up. "Mom, I need to tell you the truth about the LLC." I said nothing. I waited. She told me everything she knew, which was not everything there was to know, but it was enough, and it was honest. Darnell had approached her in December of 2022 and explained that he was setting up a family financial management structure to protect my assets from estate taxes. He had said it was standard practice for families with significant holdings. He had presented her with the registration documents and asked her to sign as co-director because he said it would look more legitimate with 2 family members involved rather than 1. She signed because she trusted him. She is his younger sister. She grew up looking up to him, believing in the version of him that existed when they were children. The older brother who taught her to ride a bike and brought her soup when she was sick and called her on her first day of nursing school to say he was proud of her. She did not know that $14,400 had been transferred from my accounts into that LLC. She did not know about the unauthorized login attempts. She did not know about the call to my doctor. She did not know about Bradley Watts. She found out about the extent of it 2 weeks before she came to my door when she was visiting Darnell's house to pick up a birthday gift for her nephew and saw his laptop open on the kitchen counter. The screen showed an email to an attorney she didn't recognize. She read enough to understand. "Mom," she said, and her voice broke on that single syllable in a way that 47 pages of handwritten notes and 53 pages of financial forensics could not have prepared me for. "I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." I sat with what she had said for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. A car went by on the street outside. I thought about what it means to love someone enough to forgive them, and what it means to love someone enough not to protect them from the consequences of what they've done. Then I stood up and went to the cabinet above the stove. I took down the white porcelain tea set with the blue flowers, the one Gerald bought for me at an antique store in Decatur for our 10th anniversary, the year we almost didn't have the money to celebrate at all, the year he saved for 4 months to buy me something beautiful. I filled the kettle. I set 2 cups on the table. "Keisha," I said with my back still to her, "do you want to fix this?" "Yes," she said immediately. No hesitation. "Then here is what I need you to do." I turned around and sat back down across from my daughter, and I told her about Gloria Simmons and the blue notebook and the trust and the plan. I told her what the meeting on January 14th would look like, and what her role in it would be, and what she would need to do before it happened. Keisha's name on that LLC registration was not a small thing. She had signed a legal document that was being used to facilitate the unauthorized transfer of funds from my accounts. That her participation was based on deception did not change what her signature made possible. Gloria had been direct with me about this. If this matter went to criminal proceedings, Keisha's involvement would be scrutinized. Before the January 14th meeting, Gloria met privately with Keisha. In that meeting, Keisha signed a sworn affidavit, a detailed written statement describing exactly what she had been told, exactly what she had believed, and exactly what she had later discovered. She formally renounced all interest in the Holloway Family Management LLC and provided full cooperation with any investigation that followed. She agreed to testify if called upon. In exchange, Gloria documented for the record that Keisha's participation had been obtained through deliberate misrepresentation, that she had no knowledge of the unauthorized transfers, and that she had voluntarily come forward before any formal proceedings began. That is why on the morning of January 14th, Keisha sat on my side of the room without being asked. She had already chosen. The meeting was just the moment when everyone else found out. In early January, Renee called Howard Pruitt's office. She identified herself as calling on behalf of Mrs. Holloway and asked to speak with someone about the current status of her accounts. Howard's receptionist took the message. Howard called me within the hour. Vanessa, he said, they are reaching out to your financial professionals. I sat with this information for a few minutes. The risk was specific. If Darnell hired an attorney and that attorney ran a title search on my property, which any competent estate attorney would do, as a matter of course, they would find the deed transfer recorded in November. They would see that the house was now in a trust, and they would understand immediately that I had acted first. If that happened before the January 14th meeting, Darnell would know his strategy had been anticipated. He might retreat. He might escalate. He might do something I hadn't planned for. What he would certainly do was stop being predictable. I needed him to walk into that meeting still believing he was about to win. I wrote him an email that evening. It was brief, it was warm, and it was constructed with the same care I once brought to client proposals, every word chosen for the impression it would create. Darnell, I've been doing a lot of thinking since we last spoke. I believe you're right that I need to get my affairs in order, and I've decided I'm ready to discuss the power of attorney and come to a final decision. I'd like to sit down with you and Keisha together. I'll have my attorney present to make sure the paperwork is handled correctly. Would Wednesday the 14th work for you at 10 in the morning at the house? Love, Mom. I used the words power of attorney. I used the phrase final decision. I told him I was ready. I told him I would have my attorney there, which to a man who believed he was about to receive an uncomplicated signature would sound like a reasonable request for procedural reassurance rather than what it actually was. He responded in 18 minutes, faster than he had responded to any message from me in 2 years. Mom, that's great news. Wednesday the 14th works perfectly. We'll be there at 10. I closed my laptop and went to bed. The evening of January 13th, I moved through the house slowly. I wasn't anxious. I want to be clear about that. I had been anxious months ago in that hospital room reading the document on my lap, feeling the particular cold that comes when you understand that someone you have loved your entire life has decided to treat you as an obstacle. That was the last time I was anxious. After that, I had been busy. I checked the blue notebook one final time and put it in the drawer of my bedside table. I confirmed with Gloria by text that she had everything she needed. I sent a brief message to Loretta. Tomorrow. We'll call after. She sent back 3 words. I'll be here. I made myself a simple dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, the meal I've made when I'm working, and don't want to think about food since the kitchen table days of 1987. I washed the dishes. I sat in the armchair in the living room with a cup of chamomile tea and let myself be quiet for a while. I thought about my mother, Dorothy Holloway, who kept a green notebook in a kitchen drawer and knew exactly where every dollar was. I thought about the girl who added up that column at 9 years old and got it right on the first try. I thought about Gerald, about the way he used to say whenever I faced something difficult, "You already know what to do, Vanessa. You just need to let yourself do it." He was right about that, as he was right about most things. Before I went to bed, I cut 6 white lily stems from a fresh bunch I'd bought at the Kroger on Cascade Road, and I arranged them in the crystal vase, and I set them in the center of the living room table. I wanted the room to look beautiful. I wanted to remember it that way. I was awake before 5, not because I couldn't sleep. I slept well, which surprised me less than it might have a year earlier, before I understood that peace is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of clarity. I simply woke up the way I have woken up before important things my entire life, as though my body understood before my mind confirmed it, that this day required my full attention from the beginning. I made coffee in the kitchen while it was still dark outside. The good coffee, the Ethiopian blend from the small roaster on Lee Street that Gerald discovered in 2009, and that I have bought every week since one of the small continuities I maintain, because continuity is its own kind of comfort. I stood at the kitchen window with my cup and watched the sky go from black to gray to the particular pale gold of an Atlanta January morning, thin and clear and without warmth. I showered. I dressed carefully, not formally, not in the way of someone trying to make an impression, but in the way of someone who knows that how you carry yourself in a room communicates something before you speak. I chose the deep burgundy dress I had worn the day I signed the papers, finalizing the sale of my company in 2019. Not for superstition, because I remembered how I felt in that room on that day, certain prepared completely myself, and I wanted to feel that way again. I went to the living room and looked at the lilies. They had opened a little more overnight, 6 white blooms against the dark wood of the table, catching the morning light that came through the curtains in long pale strips. I adjusted one stem slightly to the left. Then I sat in the armchair by the window and read my Bible for 30 minutes, not searching for anything in particular, not asking for courage because I already had it, just keeping myself company in the quiet before everything changed. At 9:30, I called Gloria. "Everything is in order," she said. "I'll be there at 9:50. I'll have coffee ready. I'll need it." She arrived at 9:52. She set her blue folder on the table, accepted a cup of coffee, and sat down at the head of the table without ceremony. We didn't talk much. There was nothing left to plan. We had been planning for 3 months, and the plan was finished. What remained was simply the execution of it. Keisha arrived at 9:58. She had come from her apartment in East Atlanta, dressed in her good coat, the navy wool one she saves for occasions that require seriousness. She came in, set her bag down, and sat on my side of the table. She looked at me. I nodded. She folded her hands in her lap and was still. Darnell and Renee arrived at 10 o'clock exactly. Darnell in the navy suit. Renee in a charcoal blazer and the expression she wears when she is managing her face rather than living in it. Darnell's eyes moved around the room when he came in, taking in Gloria at the head of the table, Keisha on my side. Something shifted in his expression for a fraction of a second before he reassembled it. He had not expected Keisha to already be seated. He had not expected her to be on that side. He sat down across from me. Renee sat beside him. He adjusted his jacket. He set his hands on the table in the posture of a man who has made plans. "Good morning, everyone," Gloria said. Her voice was even and unhurried, the voice of someone who has been in rooms like this many times and has learned that patience is the most effective tool available. Before we begin any discussion, I need to walk you through a number of legal actions that have been taken regarding Mrs. Holloway's estate over the past 10 weeks. Some of these will be new information for you. I ask that you allow me to finish before responding. Darnell glanced at me. I was looking at Gloria. She opened the blue folder. Gloria read from the folder the way she might read a financial statement methodically, without editorial, giving each item its full weight before moving to the next. The house at 4712 Cascade Drive had been transferred into the Holloway Legacy Trust on November 2nd, 2023. The transfer was complete, recorded with Fulton County, and reviewed by Judge Calvin Reeves. As of that date, the property was trust property and no longer part of Mrs. Holloway's personal estate. It was not subject to any power of attorney granted over Mrs. Holloway personally. It could not be sold, encumbered, or transferred without the authorization of the trustee, Gloria Simmons, acting in accordance with the trust instrument. The beneficiary designations on all investment and savings accounts had been updated. All assets now transferred directly to named beneficiaries upon Mrs. Holloway's passing, bypassing the probate process entirely. Those designations were irrevocable without Mrs. Holloway's direct written consent and could not be altered by a power of attorney, a court-appointed guardian, or any other third party. $200,000 had been moved to a new account at a separate financial institution. The details of that account were known only to Mrs. Holloway and her attorney. The Holloway Family Management, LLC, had been reported to the Georgia Secretary of State's office and the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance for review of potentially unauthorized financial transactions conducted in connection with accounts belonging to Mrs. Holloway. The matter was currently under active review. A comprehensive cognitive assessment administered by Dr. Elaine Fosters and a licensed neuropsychologist had been completed in November and placed on permanent file. The assessment concluded that Mrs. Holloway demonstrated exceptional cognitive function with no indicators of diminished capacity in any domain. Gloria set the last page down and folded her hands on top of the folder. In summary, she said the assets that were the subject of the proposed power of attorney are no longer accessible through that mechanism. The trust structure is in place and functioning. The regulatory referrals are on record. The room was very quiet. Renee's right hand, which had been resting on the table, moved to her lap. I noticed it because I had been watching her hands since she sat down, old habit from years of reading clients across a conference table. Hands tell you things that faces have learned to hide. Darnell had gone very still. Not the stillness of composure, the stillness of a person whose internal machinery has just encountered something it was not built to process. He was looking at the blue folder, not at me, not at Keisha. At the folder, as though somewhere in those pages there was a version of this morning that turned out differently. Gloria set a white envelope on the table between them. "This contains a settlement agreement," she said. "It requires the full repayment of $14,400, the amount transferred from Mrs. Holloway's accounts into the Holloway Family Management, LLC, within 30 days. It also requires a written commitment not to contest the current estate plan and the formal dissolution of the LLC. In exchange, Mrs. Holloway will not pursue the regulatory referrals through to criminal proceedings, and this matter will be considered resolved." She paused for exactly 2 seconds. "The alternative is that we allow the current regulatory review to proceed to its natural conclusion, and Mrs. Holloway pursues all available civil remedies through the courts." Darnell looked up from the folder. He looked at Gloria. He looked at Keisha. And then for the first time since he had sat down for the first time in what felt like longer than that, he looked at me. It was not the look I had expected. I had prepared myself for anger, for denial, for the particular cold deflection he uses when he has been caught in something and needs time to construct an exit. I had seen all of those looks before. What I saw instead was something I had not seen on my son's face since he was very young, since the years before everything complicated itself, before ambition and entitlement, and Renee's appetite for a life they couldn't afford had accumulated into this moment in my living room. What I saw for just a few seconds was the face of someone who understood exactly what he had done and who he had done it to. He looked away first. I had not planned to speak. Gloria had advised me that she would handle the legal presentation and that I should let her conduct the meeting. She was right about that, and I had agreed with her, and for 40 minutes I had sat at the head of my own table in silence and let her do her work. But there is a difference between what is legally strategic and what is true, and I had not spent 67 years learning the difference between things in order to leave the most important one unsaid. "Darnell," I said. Everyone looked at me. Gloria set her pen down. My son turned back to face me. His expression had closed again. The deflection was back in place. The careful neutrality of a man preparing to negotiate. But his eyes were tired. I could see the tiredness under the neutrality, and I understood that it had probably been there for a while, that maintaining a strategy against your own mother for 2 years costs something even when you are the one doing it. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The room was quiet enough that I could have spoken in almost a whisper and been heard clearly by everyone in it. "I brought you home from Grady Memorial Hospital in June of 1987, I said. You weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces, and you had your father's forehead, and you screamed the entire drive home, and I sat in the back seat with you because I was afraid you would be frightened if you couldn't see my face. We didn't have a crib yet. I put you to sleep in a laundry basket lined with blankets from my mother's house. I let that sit for a moment. I raised you alone for the first 4 years of your life. I paid for your MBA because I believed in you and because I wanted you to have something I'd had to build without any help. In 2018, when you came to me and said you needed $30,000 and that you would pay it back, I wrote you a check, and I never mentioned it again, not because I forgot, but because I decided that what I wanted was for you to be okay, not for you to feel indebted to me. Renee was looking at the table. I have loved you imperfectly the way all mothers love their children, with blind spots and mistakes, and things I would do differently if I had the years back. But I have loved you with everything I had from the day you were born until this morning, and I want you to know that. I need you to know that before I say what comes next. Darnell's jaw tightened slightly. He was holding himself very carefully together. What comes next, I said, is this. I am not angry with you. I am not sitting here wanting to hurt you or humiliate you or take something from you. I am sitting here because I spent 34 years building something, and because that thing what I built is not just money. It is the proof that my life meant what I believed it meant, that the work was real, that the years were real, that everything I gave up and everything I fought for and every morning I got up before the sun and went back to that table and kept going, that all of it was real and it was mine. I paused. And I will not apologize for protecting it. Not to you, not to anyone. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight, not uncomfortable complete. The kind of silence that arrives when something true has been said in a room and everyone present knows it. I love you, Darnell, I said. That has not changed and it will not change. But love does not mean I hand you the thing I built with my life because you decided you wanted it before I was finished with it. And it does not mean I pretend that what happened here was anything other than what it was. I folded my hands on the table in front of me. I looked at him steadily. Sign the agreement. Renee reached for the envelope first. She opened it, removed the document, and read it in a way that suggested she had been expecting something like this for longer than she would have admitted the focused, rapid reading of someone processing a conclusion they had already half prepared for. She picked up the pen Gloria had placed beside the envelope. She signed without looking at Darnell. Darnell sat for a moment longer. His hands were on the table in front of him, flat against the surface, the way you brace yourself against something. He looked at the document. He looked at Keisha, who met his eyes and did not look away and did not say anything. He looked at the white lilies in the center of the table. He picked up the pen. He signed his name slowly with the careful deliberateness of someone who understands that this signature, unlike the others he had hoped to obtain, is one he will carry for the rest of his life. Gloria collected the document, examined both signatures, and placed it back in the blue folder. "Thank you," she said in a tone that did not mean thank you so much as it meant we're finished here. She closed the folder. She capped her pen. She finished what remained of her coffee. Darnell and Renee left 7 minutes later. Neither of them spoke on their way out. The front door closed behind them with a sound that I will not say was quiet or loud, because what I noticed most was simply that it closed. Keisha and I sat at the kitchen for a long time after Gloria left. I stood up and went to the cabinet above the stove, the high one, the one I have to reach for, and I took down the white porcelain tea set with the blue-painted flowers. Gerald found it at an antique dealer in Decatur in 2002. We had been married 12 years, and money had been tighter than usual that year, and he had saved for 4 months without telling me. And on our anniversary, he set it on the kitchen table with a card that said in his careful teacher's handwriting, "For the woman who deserves beautiful things." I have used it for every important conversation I have had in this kitchen since the day he gave it to me. I filled the kettle. I set 2 cups on the table. I sat back down across from my daughter. Keisha looked at the tea set with the expression of someone recognizing something they have not seen in a while. "You still have it," she said softly. "I keep what's worth keeping." She wrapped both hands around her cup when I poured the way she has since she was a little girl. She always held her cups with both hands as though afraid they might escape. She looked at the steam rising from the tea. "Mom," she said, "did you know about me before I came to you?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "I knew your name was on the papers," I said. "I didn't know what you understood when you signed them." "That's a different question, and it was the only one that mattered to me." She nodded slowly. "I should have asked more questions," she said. "When he showed me the documents, I should have read them more carefully. I should have called you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." She looked up, slightly surprised by the directness of it. I looked back at her without softening it, because she is 36 years old, and she is a woman I raised to be honest, and she deserved an honest answer. "And you came and told me the truth." "I said before it was legally advantageous for you to do so, and before anyone asked you to." "That is also true, and it matters." She exhaled a long, slow breath that carried something with it as it went. "What happens now," she said, "between you and Darnell?" I looked out the kitchen window. The winter sun was higher now, falling at a different angle through the glass, reaching the far edge of the kitchen counter. In the backyard, the rose bush I planted the autumn after Gerald died was bare and brown and thorned, and from 3 of its uppermost branches there were the beginning of buds, small, tightly closed present despite everything. "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. "That depends on choices that are his to make. I have said what I needed to say. What he does with it is not something I can control, and I have spent enough of my life trying to control things that belong to other people." Keisha was quiet for a moment. "Then are you okay, Mom?" Really, I considered the question the way I try to consider all questions that deserve a real answer, not looking for the response that will reassure her, but looking for the true one. "I'm tired," I said, "and I'm relieved. And I'm sad in the particular way you were sad when something you hoped wouldn't be true turns out to be true anyway." And underneath all of that, I paused, finding the word, "I am okay." I am more okay than I have been in 2 years because I have been carrying this alone for 2 years, and it is finished now. Keisha reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her hands are Gerald's hands, the same long fingers, the same warmth. I let myself feel that for a moment without moving away from it. "Thank you for letting me be here today," she said. "Thank you for choosing to be," I said. Outside, a cardinal landed on the bare branch of the rose bush, sat there for a moment red against the brown winter, and then was gone. The settlement agreement was honored in full. 31 days after Darnell signed a wire transfer of $14,400, arrived in the account Gloria had specified. Howard Pruitt processed and confirmed it. The Holloway Family Management, LLC, was formally dissolved with the Georgia Secretary of State's office on February 19th. The regulatory referral remained on file, not pursued to criminal proceedings as I had agreed, but not withdrawn. A record is a record. The Holloway Legacy Trust continued without interruption. The house at 4712 Cascade Drive remained in the trust managed by Gloria Simmons, generating no drama and requiring no intervention. Exactly as designed. In March, I established the Holloway Scholarship Fund at Alabama A&M University. The initial endowment was $40,000 from the investment portfolio. The fund provides annual scholarships for students pursuing degrees in accounting, finance, or business administration, with preference given to first-generation college students from Alabama and Georgia. The first 2 recipients were named in May. I framed their photographs and put them on the bookshelf in the living room next to Gerald's books. And in September, I walked into Greater Refuge Baptist Church on a Wednesday evening and set up a folding table at the front of the fellowship hall with a stack of printed handouts and a whiteboard marker, and I began teaching the first session of the Holloway Financial Literacy Program, a free 8-week course in personal financial management for women over 50. 14 women came to that first class. I did not advertise it heavily. Word moved through the community the way word moves when something is genuinely needed from one woman to another in kitchens and church parking lots and hair salon chairs. There's a class over at Greater Refuge. Free, Wednesday nights. A woman named Vanessa Holloway teaches it. She used to run a financial firm. She knows what she's talking about. By the fourth week, there were 22 women in that fellowship hall. I taught them how to read a financial statement, how to check their own credit reports, how to understand the difference between a will of trust and a beneficiary designation, what a durable power of attorney actually grants and what it does not, how to recognize the signs that someone is attempting to access your finances without your full understanding. I was not gentle about any of it. These women did not need gentle. They needed information, and they needed someone to give it to them without condescension, without making them feel foolish for not already knowing it, and without anything to sell. 6 months after January 14th, on a Saturday morning in July, when Atlanta had arrived at the kind of heat that makes the air itself feel thick, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was not Darnell's. I recognized it anyway. I had seen it on holiday cards and birthday notes for 16 years. Renee. I stood at the mailbox for a moment. Then I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it. 3 paragraphs handwritten on hotel stationery. The handwriting was careful, slightly cramped the writing of someone who had started over more than once. She wrote that she and Darnell were separating, that she had moved out in April, that she was living in a corporate apartment while she figured out what came next. She wrote that she had known going into the January meeting that what they had been doing was wrong, that she had known for longer than that probably, that she had told herself things that made it easier to continue, that I had more than enough that family money should stay in the family, that Darnell deserved more than he'd received. She wrote that she had believed some of those things and used the rest as substitutes for belief. She wrote that she was sorry, that she did not expect me to respond, that she thought I deserved to hear it said plainly regardless. The 3rd paragraph was just 2 sentences. You are the strongest woman I have ever watched operate in a crisis. I hope someday I understand how you stayed that calm. I read the letter twice. I folded it along its original creases. I walked to the small office off the hallway, the room where I started the company in 1987, where the desk is the same desk where the chair has been reupholstered twice, and I put the letter in the bottom drawer with the old client files from the early years, the ones I keep because they are the record of where everything started. I did not write back, not because I was unwilling and not because I was unforgiving, but because some things do not require a response to be received. She had said what she needed to say. I had heard it. That was enough. As for Darnell, I have not seen him since January 14th. He has not called. I have not called. I am not certain what shape a relationship between us might take from here, or whether it will take any shape at all. What I know is that I am not chasing it. I spent too many years of my life moving toward people who are moving away from me to spend the years I have left doing the same thing. If he comes, I will open the door. That much I know about myself. I am his mother. That does not stop. But I will not go to him. Not anymore. On a Wednesday evening in October, cool finally, the first real cool of autumn, the kind of evening that makes Atlanta remember it is in the South rather than the tropics, I was stacking handouts after class when Ruth Simmons stayed behind. Ruth is 71 years old. She came to the program in week 2, referred by her neighbor. She is sharp and funny and has the particular quality of attention that belongs to people who have spent their lives listening more than they speak. She had told me in week 3 that her son-in-law had been making withdrawals from a joint account she shared with her late husband without telling her. She was deciding what to do about it. She waited until the other women had filed out, and then she came to the folding table where I was gathering my things, and she looked at me with the straightforward curiosity of someone who has decided she is too old for indirection. Mrs. Holloway, she said, how did you stay so calm through all of it? Because when I think about what happened to you, what your own son tried to do, I think I would have fallen apart. I think I would have wanted to. I stopped stacking and looked at her. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer, not a composed one. Not the kind of answer you give when you want to sound wise, but the kind you give when you are telling someone the actual truth. I did fall apart, I said. In the hospital the night I read those documents, I lay in that bed after I called my friend and I stared at the ceiling and I felt everything you would expect a person to feel. The grief of it. The shock that it had come to this. Ruth nodded, waiting. The calm came later. And it came from the same place the work always came from deciding that I was not going to let what was happening to me become bigger than what I was capable of. I have been doing that my whole life. It is not a special skill. It is just a choice made over and over in whatever room you're in. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then what about forgiving him? I picked up the stack of handouts and squared the edges. I'm working on it, I said. Forgiveness is not a single decision. It's more like the work. You come back to it, you do a little more of it. You put it down when you need to and pick it up again. I'm not finished with it yet. She considered this. Then she nodded once, picked up her coat and her bag, and said good night. I locked up the fellowship hall, walked to my car in the dark parking lot, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The night was genuinely cool for the first time in months. Through the windshield, I could see the lights of the church, and beyond them the dark sky and 1 or 2 stars visible despite the city glow. I started the car and drove home. There is something I have not told you yet. The day after the January meeting, January 15th, a Thursday, I went to Gloria's office to review some final paperwork. On my way back to the car, I stopped at a jeweler on Peachtree Road. Not a large one, not an expensive one. A small shop that has been there since at least the 1980s, run by an older man named Arthur Delaney, who knows what he is looking at and doesn't waste words. I had brought something with me in a small velvet pouch. It was a ring not mine. My mother Dorothy's ring, a simple gold band with a small round diamond that my father Robert had given her in 1954, the year before I was born. She wore it every day for 41 years until he died. After she died, it came to me. I had been keeping it in the home safe for 12 years, meaning to do something with it, and never knowing quite what. I asked Arthur Delaney to look at it. He examined it under his loupe for a few minutes, the setting the stone, the condition of the band. He told me it was in good shape. He asked what I had in mind. I'd like it cleaned and resized, I said. For my daughter. He looked up from the loupe. Size. She's a 7. He nodded and wrote it down. I picked it up 2 weeks later and gave it to Keisha on a Sunday afternoon in February, sitting at the kitchen table with the blue flower tea set between us. I did not make a ceremony of it. I set the small velvet pouch in front of her and told her whose it was and where it had come from and how long I had been keeping it. She opened the pouch and held the ring in her palm and looked at it for a long time. "Mom," she said finally, her voice the particular quiet of someone trying not to lose their composure. "Why now?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the blue notebook and the 53-page report and the morning with the white lilies and the sound of a pen signing something that could not be unsigned. Because I spent a year making sure the things I've built go to the right people. I said, and I realized I had been keeping the most important things in safes when I should have been giving them to the hands that would take care of them. Keisha put the ring on. It fit. She reached across the table and took my hand, and we sat there in the kitchen of the house I have lived in for 30 years, the house that is safe now, the house that is mine. And outside the kitchen window, the rose bush that I planted the autumn after Gerald died was beginning slowly and without announcement to come back. My son drove to my house that Wednesday morning thinking he was finally going to get what he'd been waiting for. He had no idea that everything he came for was already gone and that I was the one who moved it.